Thanks for having me, Justin, Eric, and everyone involved in AppliedAI. I love the name of the meetup because I am not an academic. I'm an engineer. I like solving problems. In fact, I either describe myself as a technologist or a problem solver. I'm not strictly an engineer. I'm not strictly a business person. I like to marry this all together to solve problems, not thinking about them in the silos that they existed. So I really like the name of the group, Applied AI. My name, you already know my name, but I've been in technology my entire adult life, specifically within the education industry. I started in 1999 with a software development group, Computing Options, that became Region Education, and then moved my way into for-profit higher education. And I've been in for-profit higher education for 12 years now. I've worn many different hats, from customer service, release engineer, configuration management, product implementation, development engineering, and now I lead a team of engineers and analysts that are responsible for doing what I just said. We're finding ways to use technology to solve business problems or education problems as we come across them. And one of the ways that we've done that is with conversation. The presentation and the bot that you're going to see, I actually developed as a result of the GDG Twin Cities request for presentation on Dialogflow in particular. But we're going to tailor this conversation specifically to engineering a conversation. And I will show a demonstration of how to accomplish a conversation using Dialogflow. But as we go through things, I'll talk about alternative services that are out there that you can look into that are as powerful or have different pros and cons. And I'll even share with you a little bit of why we chose Dialogflow over what existed at the time. Starting this conversation, I should let you know that myself and my team have built 3 bots that are in production now, the oldest of which has been in production for about 4 years. And it took us a few months to go from prototype to production pilot. And that should tell you a little bit if you take into consideration what I told you about my background. I never once mentioned anything about a data scientist background job, nothing within advanced analytics or anything like that. I came from an engineering background with a problem that needed to be solved. At the time, the problem that I needed to solve was that we had more support requests coming in than we had staff that could field those support requests. And a lot of the questions were transactional. They're rote, routine questions that could be answered in an automated fashion. And if we had approached this, more than 5 years ago, we would be talking about building our own language models, our massive language models, and doing our intent classification in a very finite way. Maybe we would be using Spacey and the language models that had already been built there, but we hadn't seen the transformer-based models that are now becoming more and more popular. But when we started our investigation 4.5 years ago, we came across a number of vendors or software as a service that were available. Dialogflow, Amazon Lex was in its infancy. IBM Watson had been released, but you needed somebody from IBM typically to help you implement. And then there was a combination of Microsoft, Spot Framework, and Louise. And then there was API.ai, which is now Dialogflow. And when we looked at all of these services, Dialogflow was the lowest barrier to entry to do this. It took intent management, dialogue management, response management, and made it easy to add fulfillment. And all of these I'll talk a little bit about as we go through the presentation. But it kind of, it wasn't like an all-in-one router, which I typically hate. You know, all-in-one routers, they never do anything very well. They do everything mediocre or okay. But Dialogflow seemed to combine these things into a way that I could not necessarily worry about having to know language modeling and could focus on engineering a conversation. And from that, within just a few months, we were able to go from production, from prototype to production pilot. That bot that is now 4 years old has had over 1.25 million conversations with over an 80% satisfaction rate of the users that were surveyed. And it detects the user's intent 94% of the time without escalation to live agent. Okay, with that background, we're going to jump into the anatomy of a bot, explaining some of those keywords that I was throwing out. When we think about natural language processing and bots in general, there is an anatomy that is common amongst all vendors. There are entities, which are essentially nouns or ideas or specific coding mechanisms that we have in place within whatever domain we're creating a bot for. A user ID might be one. If you have a sequential user ID, for example, then that could be potentially an entity. Or if you're in the healthcare, the way that we code for drugs, the way that we code diseases, the way that we code anything could be an entity. They can even be composite entities where they combine multiple nouns, if you will, with joining words. For example, in the higher education domain, I want a bachelor's degree of computer science or a bachelor's degree in computer science. So you could have a composite entity that is, let's call it degree program. And it uses those, you can use those joining words as to create a composite entity of degree level and program of study. Intents are exactly what you think. When I say to you, what is the cost of your program? My active intent is I want to know what the tuition is for the computer science program. Or if you're a retailer, what is the cost of the Pixel phone? I want to know the cost of a product, and the Pixel phone would be an entity for the product that I'm looking for. Responses are how we want to respond to the user when we know their active intent. And responses can include the entities that we gather, the parameters that we gather from users. And then we also have fulfillment. And we were talking a little bit about this before the meetup really got started. Fulfillment is where you can tie your conversations into the systems that you have. You can have advanced orchestration. So with various products, you have different ways that you can orchestrate a conversation, combining a variety of the intents into a complete user experience. You can orchestrate that using fulfillment, and you can personalize with fulfillment. And we'll get into that just a little bit more in a few slides. So entities more deeply help build a language model. As we talked about before, the idea of an entity is it's a coded value for a person, place, or thing. So let's take, I'm trying to think of something that may be very common. All right, HR, for example, okay? We have to regularly update our W-2 forms, for example. Now, we refer to a W-2 as a W-2, a W-2, a tax form. I need to update my deductions. or I need to update my dependencies, things like that. So you could find ways to synonyms, if you will, to reference how people would reference the W-2 entity. Or maybe it's an expense form. So maybe they say expense form, maybe they say expense reimbursement form, maybe they say remission form. However your users respond to it, by creating that as an entity, you can use it in your training data to annotate rather than call it out. You know, we just talked about 3 different ways to say expense form. Well, if we did one and annotate that and say it's an entity of type expense form, then we save ourselves and exponentially increase the training data in our model without having manually type that. And when you think, if you have noodled around with creating language models in Python or other programming languages, it takes a lot of data, a lot of training data to create a model. I mean, a lot of data. When the products that we have out there and available, and we talked about 3 big commercial players, but I also want to plug Raza, which is an open source bot framework that is really powerful, really configurable. When you think about using each one of these and only having to put in maybe 10 at a minimum training phrases in order to have an effective and releasable, testable bot, that's pretty amazing compared to the number of training phrases in the hundreds, thousands, or whatever that you would have to do, say 5-6 years ago to create your own intent classification model. Never mind that when you're talking about engineering a conversation, intent classification is just one piece of it. Then there's the orchestration. Okay, so I classified your intent as I need information on a product. Okay, now what? I gave you information on a product, or maybe now I need to give information. So I've got to coordinate and quarterback that. I'm going to toss you off to a response handler. Now I have to write a response handler. So I've given you the response. Now what? Do I sit here and wait for input? Do I want to take into context anything I know about you and recommend you do something else? If you were doing all of this on your own, you would have to create your own massive orchestration system. And who the hell wants to maintain all of that? Not me.
Yeah, I was going to say, Daniel, just interjecting, you're talking about a lot of data. I mean, I just think about how long it takes just a child to finally start formulating sentences and then start to become and it's one thing to formulate a sentence, but like you said, it's another thing to actually ingest information, process it, and then provide a proper response. And as we all know, that takes years and years and a lot of intuition, a lot of back and forth, a lot of communication. So imagining a computer, because it's just as dumb as a kid when it's born, so it needs, all that information needs to be somehow digitized. So it's not surprising that it's going to take a lot of data to make these things actually work somewhat reliably.
Yeah, it took a lot more data 5 to 6 years ago. Now it takes less data, but entities can help you with that as you're building a bot. Okay. The analogy of a child is good, Justin, because it is like an infant, a perpetual infant that is learning very slowly. My toddlers, I was developing this. My youngest is 7 years old, so I was developing this as she was really developing her own language model, and I was observing how fast that she could learn compared to how fast I could train these language models. And let me tell you, she is hands down smarter than anything. That is
right.
And so, something else to call out there. And we're jumping ahead a little bit on responses, but we're not talking about generating responses. And not that generative responses aren't possible. We've got GPT-2 and 3 that can generate kind of good responses, or at least full sentences. Then we've got BERT that has been also used to do some summarization of text. So you could potentially do generation like that. But when you're in a regulated environment right now, I think you're some years away from being able to generate responses automatically using a model with regards to creating conversational experiences. Back on entities, entities specifically within Dialogflow can also be used for memory. So by defining entity types, you can combine those with parameters and then combine those parameters with context so that there is variable storage and memory available within the bot that can be used and recalled later in conversations or intents. We'll show some examples of those. If at any time, I talk really fast, guys, so if any time I'm going too fast or you have questions, please feel free to jump in and or say, slow down. I did drink an Americano before this, so that might have something to do with it.
Yeah, I'd mentioned it in the chat here too. If anyone wants to, you know, feel free to post a question in there. I'm more than happy to moderate it. Or, like you said, Daniel, you can unmute yourself here in the meetings and just jump into the conversation. It'd be great.
This is about having a conversation, so yes. And if not, Justin is recording this, and you can slow me down on YouTube once it's posted. All right, moving on to another major piece. Again, common amongst all NLP bot frameworks are intents. And intents are where you define the training phrases that help you classify. And you'll have a name for your intent that is essentially the classification. If we're talking about, I want pricing for product, you might have an intent that it is named product_pricing or product.pricing. And that lets you know that that is your classification, product and pricing, your high level domain, and then the detail or topic within that domain. Within each of these products, but Dialogflow specifically, there is a recommendation that you have at least 10 training phrases. And as you move into production, you'll see why. We often group as engineers phrases together that may not necessarily, the active intent is slightly different, like how versus why. Okay, how do I get information, or how do I get a good GPA? Why did I get a 4.0 GPA? Not that any student ever has asked that, but maybe why did I get a 2.5 GPA? Well, those are really close, and you could, and I maybe have, created training phrases that put them into one intent. And that one intent has a massive response that says, our GPAs are calculated based on blah, 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 and your course grades were blah, 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 therefore your GPA is that. So how is a GPA calculated versus why did I get my GPA? They're similar, but they're not quite the same. And you could, when you're talking about delivering conversation, it doesn't matter if it's voice or text. In this day and age, we have small attention spans, and we don't want to read or listen a whole lot. So be as brief as you can and answer the active intent and be prepared for follow-up intents. So you may start very broad, like we've done, and then as you see the differences in how your users speak to you, you might break those training phrases into different intents so that you can address those like that.
I got a quick question, Daniel. And I'm sure you'll cover this, but like, and how does domain knowledge and domain expertise, because a word can mean something different based on somebody's background, and you know, I can't think of one right now, but you know, if you're a medical doctor and you hear a certain word, you're going to think something different than if you're a school teacher, right? So like, how does that play into kind of how you build these things? Are they really specific around, I'm going to take this word to sort of have this connotation or this meaning based on how you build your models?
It is entirely based on how you build your models, and I'm glad that you asked. In fact, if you look at the middle column here on the annotation, so PCA, if I say PCA, that could be public, I guess it's usually public service announcement, but it's an acronym. What the hell does it mean?
Right. Yeah, right.
It takes domain knowledge, and this is where your subject matter experts within your various business units or your organization that are going to come in and tell you, I don't know all of the coded ways that we talk to our user base. I don't know what they are, what they mean, any of that. I don't know how they're the variances in those. So you have to expand that out. Expand your involvement into a cross-domain experience and pull in everyone to help participate. Give me 5 ways that a user has spoken to you like this. And then as humans, we are great at pattern recognition. And at engineers, we are probably maybe even more suited for pattern recognition. We have to search for the patterns in that to help us define the language model that we're going to within these bots. So in this case, Justin, PCA, I created an entity that is synonymous with Professional Cloud Architect. Professional Cloud Architect is a certification that Google offers. And I know this because I am a PCA. I'm a certified cloud architect with Google, but not everyone knows that. Someone might type out
right.
Professional Cloud Architect or Pro Cloud Architect. So you have to know and monitor to answer your question. You project if you don't have data. If you do have data, say from chat logs or voice logs that you've converted into text, then you can start getting some annotations from that and build your language model based on pre-existing data. The beauty of a bot is that it's never ending. And you're constantly chasing the long tail. It's a little bit like Pandora's box. Once your users know that you have this automated system that doesn't judge them, they're going to ask it every question. If you help them in one way, they're going to come back to it and ask for help in another topic, another domain.
That makes sense. That makes sense. There was a question that came in here from Max. He was just wondering, he said, I have no experience with these platforms, but imagining how entities are typically defined, do today's platforms allow creation and definition of new entities from conversations? So yes. I wonder if he's getting it based on conversations that are going on, they can be defined sort of on the fly, I guess, or learned.
They can be defined. I've not run into a system that is automatic. That's not true. Dialogflow does allow for what they call automatic expansion and fuzzy matching that would allow it to automagically grow. What I've seen in practice is that its fuzzy matching isn't quite as good as I would like, and it matches erroneously. So false positive matches. So I like a little more finite control, and I have staff manually annotate based on an aggregate review.
Gotcha. So it turns into a little more of a manual process.
It does, so that we can have the finite level of control. But we'll show you an example. There are a number of ways within Dialogflow in particular. You can also set up regex-based entities. So when you have coded values that follow a specific pattern or nomenclature, then regex all day. For example, Dialogflow has a limit to the number of entity values you can have. Well, the number of ways that you can refer to a university or all of the colleges and universities within the United States would exceed that. And I don't want to type them all in by hand. So I want to create a regex that says college, university, school of so on and so forth, that we can then use to pull out and extract that entity.
I see.
So you can do something like that.
If I may interject, what I was imagining was using a bot system like this for engineering applications to define a set of requirements where there are requirement interdependencies and such. That was the application I was considering.
You could absolutely do that. And one of the ways that you could, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but one of the ways that you could do that, Max, is using context and or fulfillment. Fulfillment allows you to handle the orchestration. So when you, taking it back to when you start a bot, one of the number one recommendations that's out there, not just from me, but from other people, is script out your conversation. Start with a whiteboard or act like you're writing a movie. User says, bot says, user says, bot says, user says, bot says, user says, bot says. Do your happy path. That's what you want to happen. And then come back in and go through the not so happy path or the branching logic, Max, that you're going to have. It is a little bit of a decision tree, and you're going to use context to set that. So I know that if I hit, we'll try to show you an example of it within the bot that was created, or we can create one real time.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. All right. So in responses, we've already spoken a little bit. We're not doing generative responses. We are doing prescribed responses based on the user's active intent. And these are, when they're defined within Dialogflow in particular, these are the default messages that we're going to use. So if we didn't have to get anything from fulfillment or didn't need to redefine or add different types of responses in there, then we'll use these default messages. If fulfillment is enabled, the only way that you're going to get these is if fulfillment comes back with no messages in Dialogflow. So just keep that in mind if you're going to use Dialogflow. And for what it's worth, Dialogflow ES is a free version. You can sign up for it and play around to your heart's content. Within the responses, you can refer to the entities that were set up as parameters and substitute in so that you don't have to hard code anything that says, I want the color red shirt. I want the color blue shirt. You could just put in, let's say color is the parameter name. I want the $color shirt. Or I've added $color shirt to your cart. Within Dialogflow in particular, there is a randomization factor. So if you have, as you can see on the right, I've defined 4 different greetings. You can apply this to any intent. Dialogflow is going to randomly select which one of these to give. And that adds a little bit of variety. This is important when your users are going to hit the same intent over and over again, regardless of whether or not you want them to. For example, within the domain that I work, there are a finite number of intents that get hit on a regular, repeated basis by the same user because they want status updates. And it's so easy to get that information from the bot that they'll just ask day in and day out. Adding variety into those responses makes it feel a little less stale. Context is something else we were talking about when we just started the conversation a little bit prematurely. Context is everything. Context, if you act like you don't know your user or you can't remember what the user said 2 turns ago and you need to refer to it, but can't, then you have to ask them for it all over again and you get a frustrating user experience. Think in terms of an IVR environment. Have you ever called let's say your insurance company, and you've given them your account number, and you're calling about a claim, and you've given them the claim number. Oh, I'm sorry, you're in Minnesota. I only handle Wisconsin. Let me transfer you. Okay, can I have your account number and claim number? How frustrated are you? You're angry. It's a bad experience. You don't want to do that with your bot. You want to pass that information around. In fact, not only do you want to pass it around, but if you get to the point of human escalation, you want all that information available to them too, so that they don't have to ask for it. So context within dialogue flow is how you put together a variety of intents to create a true conversational experience. This can happen within dialogue flow itself, so that you don't have to, if you've got power users that you would trust with this, you could maybe give them access to dialogue flow and they could orchestrate a conversation without having been an engineer or developer. Or if there's considerable logic, and Max, I think this is where maybe you were hitting on a little bit, where there's some complex logic and or stored dependencies, you could orchestrate that yourself by setting the context, or you could set call and or respond very broadly yourself. Context is not indefinite. Let's go back to the color, for example. I want to buy the red shirt, but I add that to my cart, for example, using conversation, but I want the blue pants. That color, we want to have context to whatever the new product is. Once I've added that product, I want the idea of the shirt context to go out, and I want pants context in, so that I can recall that in the appropriate. So you can set a lifetime for that, or as you get to the end of that branch of the conversation, you can remove the you can remove that context by setting the lifetime to 0. In this case, I'm setting an output context of CTX PCA credential, just trying to illustrate a little bit. And this is on the intent that is about the professional cloud architect credential. And in the follow-up, so let's say someone asks, can you tell me about the cloud architect cert? Yeah, the cloud architect cert is blah, blah, blah. And then I ask, how much does it cost? Well, a computer doesn't know what the hell it is. But due to context and defining an input context on the cost intent, along with the training phrases, I know that it refers to the PCA credential. And we'll show you that here in a demo in just a minute, I promise. And I saw Justin yawning, so let me know if I'm being boring, Justin.
No, this is good. I had another quick question. You talked about having to re-enter your information or sort of like restate it. I thought a little bit about personalization, and like when you have a conversation, usually when you call support, somebody might say your name again. They might say, "I'm sorry, Daniel. Is that able to be built in? Is that something to factor in? Just a little bit more of the conversational side that humans have when they maybe add somebody's name into the sentence."
Absolutely. And this is, yes. The simple answer is absolutely yes. And we can even go through an example of creating that so that you can see it in action a little bit. But another thing to point out there related to that, Justin, is that you can also use this to extract information. Think about this for a second. You're on a client-facing website, okay, or a prospect-facing website. And you want to get information from the visitors. But a visitor sees a form and they run for the hills. Like immediately U-turn, go away. Like who the hell wants to fill out a form? But they're having a hard time, God forbid, having a hard time navigating your website. So they see the bot pop up and say, hey, I'm your friendly neighborhood chatbot here to help you with company X. Oh, it's a chatbot. You know what? Let me see if they've got it. Got the information I'm looking for. You ask for that information. And let's just say that the bot follows up, hey, I'm whatever bot, who am I chatting with? All right, so now I just got your name. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Justin.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else I can help you out with today?
Mm-hmm.
Or Justin, did you know that we have a special on whatever it is I'm selling at the moment.
Mhm.
Or did you know that we also have an active support group over here? My point is that in conversation, we give away a lot more information than we do in our forms. We often find it onerous to provide a lot of information to a form, but if we were talking to a human being in a conversation, we would
Yeah.
give away so much more information.
True.
That information can be collected and recalled for additional, more rich conversations.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's easier to speak than it is to type in a lot of ways. And typing feels very rigid, and you're going to go back and put commas in, and you're going to, yeah, at least that's the way I type. So it's much more of a think, write, go back, edit, and then hit enter or return, whatever. Whereas in a conversation, it's more free flowing. So you're right. I just think off the top of your head, you're going to say stuff, you're going to open up, you're going to use you're going to use words in conversation you wouldn't actually use if you were to type. So I think the vocabulary is different, and if you can play on that from a personalization standpoint, it's kind of where I was thinking.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
I could be projecting my own bias and or suffering from foot and mouth disease myself, but my speech pattern is much faster. My thought and speech is much faster than my thought to type.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, hell, sometimes the thoughts aren't even complete before the speech comes out. All right, demo time. Let me know if I need to zoom in on dialog flow. So this is going to be a live demonstration, so we can break things. This bot is not in production, doesn't need to be really maintained in any pristine kind of way. I wanted to start first by pulling up a website. So within each of your respective companies or in your personal websites, you might have an FAQ. And that FAQ might have good questions and answers. You can mine that FAQ using Dialogflow and other products, for what it's worth, to flesh out your bot. And I say flesh out because I highly discourage the use of a bot for FAQs. And the reason for that is if your users were going to use an FAQ, they'd use your FAQ because you make it easy to find. Most FAQs are really easy to find. They just don't have the nuance or the personalization that users are looking for. So for example, maybe you're in the negative situation where a user wants to know how long does it take to process refunds. Okay, a generic 7 to 10 business days, that sucks. If it would be much better to get to say, the refund for product X was submitted on this date and will be processed by this date. But you can use FAQs for general information that doesn't necessarily need personalized. So in this case, I've taken in the FAQ about the Google Cloud certifications that are very broad. And I've used Google's dialog connector, or their knowledge connector, to create an about certs FAQ. And I'm going to go back one screen just so we see it. We can see that it's defined as a knowledge type of FAQ. The other one is extractive question and answer, which is again indicative that none of us on this call need to be ML or NLP experts in order to do what we're doing. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, in this case, Google. And we know that the type is going to be HTML, and here is the path. Let's go back into it. When I fed that in, it extracted these questions automatically. Now, Google is going to great lengths to format their FAQ in a very easy to parse manner. So you'll have to take that into consideration when you're trying to do this. So this is a polite way of saying your mileage may vary. But with this in mind, we can come back over here to try it now. And let me get off the knowledge one that shows all the questions. Let's see, can I take the exam with a peer? I don't know if this is going to work. Let's see. All right. So it pulled this from the FAQ link up that we just showed. Here's the answer. Now, that doesn't seem to match. That answer doesn't match. Let's go over here and take a look at some of the questions with a group or partner. So that's what I would have expected the answer here. So what's another way we can ask that? Let's see if that works. There you go. So didn't input it exactly as they had it in the FAQ, but I've got that. Now, if we look at the diagnostic info, it'll tell us a little bit more information about what was matched. So here is the user's query. And we got our fulfillment message, but we're going to go down and see that the intent was a knowledge base intent. And it's 90%, roughly 90% confident that it is accurate. And we know that the first one is the one that has the same score. So this is what's been returned. But here are some others that it could have been. So in your display of this or presentation to your users, you could offer these up. So we noticed that the first time I didn't get what I expected. So we could potentially offer up these as alternatives. So we're not perfect, don't know if this is exactly what you want. So you could offer those up. And you could do that based on the match confidence and give them a richer experience. Okay. For this, I've defined a few intents. And you'll notice that I'm following a loose taxonomy for the intent names. So when I'm doing about, I have about as the first word, and I'm separating some of the things by periods. So you might have topic, domain, detail. So topic is about, domain is the associate cloud engineer or ACE, and then the detail is the credential. We'll go into each one of those in just a minute. For each of these certs, I have created an entity. And the entity allows us to define the synonyms for that. Now, when we have defined entities and we map those to parameters, we're going to always get this value here on the left. So if we do no. There we go. So ACE cert. So we'll go into this intent. And it has a parameter defined for ACE cert to the entity type that we just saw. And we can see that it's returning a value of ACE, even though that's not, that is exactly what I put in. Let's try. Well, I'll be damned. Let's see what we've got in here. Can you tell me about the Acer? Let's make sure that we add that as a synonym to the entity. We'll save entities, and that was ACE.
I got a quick question. Maybe didn't have to interject too much, but is this case sensitive? So if somebody says, I got an ace of spades, would it know the difference in that?
Ace of spades. So that is contextually sensitive. Let's yes and no.
Okay.
It's not case sensitive though.
Okay.
So
if somebody said, what is ace, ACE, just like you did, except you just did it lowercase.
Yep.
It still understands that.
Yep.
Okay.
And you'll notice that it returns the uppercase value that we had on the left. But if you come down here, you'll see that the parameters also has a dot original in there, so that you can use the user's vernacular instead of your own. One of my pet peeves is that we push so much jargon onto our users, and it doesn't matter what domain it is. Every domain, we push jargon. But if you can speak to them in their own vernacular and map their vernacular to your domain, the user experience is going to be so much better.
Yeah, true.
All right, so let's see if there we go. So this time I said the associate cloud, can you, what do you know about the cloud engineer? So there we go. A couple of different ways that we can talk about it. And again, I said cloud engineer, it returns ACE. If we come back into guess I didn't have any parameters defined in there. All right, let's go back into, I thought there was, okay. There it is, the parameters assert. All right, let's come into one with a little bit of context on it. So PCA. So in this case, we've got the cloud architect, and we're essentially doing the same thing. Got some misspellings in there. Let's go into that entity and make sure we allow for misspellings. Okay, there we go. We were talking a little bit earlier. This is where you would define a regex entity. And I can pull up a different bot to show an example of that if we need to.
I was gonna say, it's pretty cool that you can just check a box called fuzzy matching and it just sort of does all this magic for you. It's amazing.
Yeah, I didn't notice if it retrained after I did that. So I'm gonna go in here and manually kick off training. And you'll notice that it's letting me know over on the lower right, and it'll let me know when it finishes, and it shouldn't take long because it's a very small bot. There we go. Pull up my PCA just so I have it as a reference. There we go. Let me try. What is the professional? Let's leave out the L. And we're still able to get it with the cert PCA. And there is my original in the context. So you see that I've got the CTX PCA credential. I've got the original way that it was referred to, and then the value, the coded value that I might want to use in fulfillment. And you'll also see the context set in this console. How much does it cost? All right. So now we know that we're in there in the professional cloud architect. And we've used that context. So let's go over here real quick. And let's put in, let's see, what was our context? CTX PCA credential. And cert PCA dot original. Let's see, we'll save that. Should kick off training automatically. But let's try it again. We're going to reset. No, context is already reset. Context was reset to 0 because we set it right there, which means that it's no longer in. So we can say, what is the professional cloud architect cert? Get the response. How much does it cost? Now, if you look at that, it put back exactly what I input. Okay, and I'm going to go into integrations real quick and pull this up. So Justin, you were asking, say, I said, hi, I'm Daniel. And hey there, Daniel. So now I have that name in my context that I can start using it and use that for later personalization. I'm trying to think of some other things that other little bits of wisdom I can add before I start opening it up for questions. Fulfillment. Go ahead, Justin. It sounded like you might have had a question.
Well, actually, Louis had a question here I was going to ask. He asked, is there a difference between vernacular and jargon? And Louis, I don't know if you wanted to elaborate at all on that, but I don't know if they're synonyms of each other. I don't know enough about, I guess I was kind of like Googling around vernacular versus jargon, but.
Well, yeah, so both terms kind of came up in the same, conversation. And I was like, these, we don't talk in these terms day to day, but we definitely live in them. And so I was like, what is vernacular? What is jargon? What does that mean? And I Googled too, and they are synonymous according to the Google. But it's still they're complex. So like when you talk about context, I'm thinking about there's like a conversational session where you were just talking about, like, you picked up a name, within the session, but it seems like jargon and vernacular are more about, I don't know how to describe this, like culture, or even like, what are we talking about? Why are we talking about? You mentioned earlier about, like, are we talking in a medical, are we talking medical? Are we talking society? What are we talking about? It's so complex. It's just mind-boggling, and it's not stuff that you think about every day. But I didn't know if there was some ways to deal with that. that dialogue flow had already considered. So I was just kind of throwing that out.
So that's first an opinionated response to, are they the same? Vernacular is common speech. It is how you and I might interact with our children or our peers outside of a business. Jargon are the coded, specialized language that we use within our domains. So
Yeah.
they are different. And I would say that your jargon is in translating that into dialogue flow. And that's why I'm giving you, and I did warn Justin that I'm very opinionated. Translating that into terms in dialogue flow, the jargon would go into your entity. So if a student in my domain, for example, wants to submit a request to get transfer credit, they would submit what we call a transcript evaluation form. Okay. They don't know that. That is what we refer to it. In fact, we might even call it TEF.
TEF, yeah. Yep.
So yeah. Oh, did you submit your TEF? That might as well be the TPS from Office Space, right?
I'm glad you said that. Yep.
So you create entities for that say, okay, when they say transfer credit, I'm going to translate that to TEF, and you're going to create an entity for that. Now, when we talk about vernacular, it might be, yo, can I get credit for coursework that I did at whatever?
Wow. Yeah. I get that. Thanks for your precision. That makes sense. Yep.
And it sounds like semantics, and I used to get really frustrated with.
Well, it cross cuts. I get it. When you say it that way, it cross cuts. I get that. Yeah.
I used to work with a behavioral psychologist, and if Raymond ever watches this, I love you, Raymond. I miss you. But we used to get so caught up in the syntactical, linguistic dogma of what is.
Yeah.
And it's a spiral. My recommendation is to start and assume that you know, and then evaluate based on how your users are using the bot in any way, shape, or form, and adjust based on that.
Perfect.
Follow that.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to cover just a little bit of fulfillment. Fulfillment is where you can do a little bit of personalization. And I'm going to comment this all out because this has no bearing on what we're doing here. It was a test bed for something else. So fulfillment, this is where you would tie into all of your back office systems. So if you wanted to pull information from one of your databases, if you have APIs that you want to integrate with, if you have a middleware that you communicate with, you would do that within fulfillment. And Dialogflow has the capability to do it within an inline editor using their cloud functions, specifically with Node.js. You can set up fulfillment to hit your own on-prem endpoints. Just know that you'll have to handle some authentication and validation of identity, and that should be considered when you're definitely giving any kind of PII out. Personally, I say I hate jargon and then I use it. PII, personally identifiable information. When you go through that, I did something on. I only wanted. Let me use real words and full sentences. Okay, so Google Cloud has a lot of products, right? They have Kubernetes engine, they have cloud storage, they have whatever, a whole bunch of them. Now you can create entities for each one of those products, you can create intents for each one of those products, or you can consolidate that into one and say, and then have fulfillment come back and give you all of that information. So when we look at our entities real quick, I defined a few products. So compute engine, Kubernetes engine, cloud storage, cloud functions, and Google Cloud Run. Just a few, not all of them. Then we have an intent that maybe is a request for more information. You know, we talked about users, you want to collect information so that you can sell to them, for example. Well, this could be a way that you could do it. And it takes in a variety of parameters: name, email, and product. And there are a variety of ways that you can get into this. But what if you don't want to, what if you don't want it to be so rigid and you want it to be a little bit more fluid? In the fulfillment, I have defined the products. These are the products that I'm going to accept information on, okay? And then I have somewhere in here, product info. I'm defining what parameters I need and where I'm going to get them from. And then I look for those. If I don't have product, well, that's what I need to know first. What product do you want information on? Okay. And then I validate if there is the product. So let's pull this up into integration. Hopefully I left the fulfillment working, and we'll. All right, so in the fulfillment, it said you didn't define which products. So I'm now going to use a multimodal interface. You could leave this and say for which product and let them input it. Or if you've got a very tight or rigid response, like you need a yes, you need a no, or something like that, you can use suggestion chips, which is what we have here. And great. So I told them that I want GCE. All right, my name is Daniel. And now it's collected that, and we'll send you some information. I didn't actually hook up the send an email or anything like that, but more information could be sent. You could perform some action. Some of the actions we perform within the bots that we perform registrations. So if a student needs to register for classes, we can pull up their program and we can actually register for them for the class. Going through some, question and answers, making sure that it's within their program, that it fits toward one of their requirements, that they haven't already taken it, that there's availability, and then submit that in, tying it in all via fulfillment, performing transactions for them. This is done in a number of areas, like your credit card company, Bank of America has Erica, and you can use that chatbot to put a hold on your credit card so that it can't be used. You can request a refund for a duplicate charge, performing transactions. If there's one thing that you take away, make it useful to them, to your users. All right, my mouth is really dry, so we're going to open it to questions.
That was great. That was great, Daniel. So I had just a question along those lines, just mainly around making it better for the customer. Do you have easy ways to, through the API, I guess, to have the system get better to train itself, right? So you keep asking these same questions of people, and there's, like you said, like a multimodal selection, and people keep answering, answer C, for example. Can you tweak the algorithm, or can you somehow, basically based on input from the users, is there an easy way to flow that back into dialog flow and say, you know what, they're answering this all the time, let's raise this as a possible solution or a possible response based on data you're getting from the real world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. So there are a couple of ways that you can go about doing something like that. One of the ways that we have piloted in the past is we took all of our fallbacks, and a fallback is any time that the bot didn't understand. And we then create a very large AutoML classification system where, based on labeling that is done by subject matter experts. What did they mean when they said this? Okay. Then, with that classification model in mind, you, based on your intent nomenclature or taxonomy, you know what intents belong in that category or that class, that high level classification. So what we had done in the past was, give me the top 3 within this classification. I didn't understand you, but did you mean one of these 3?
Yeah, sure.
And if they add one of those 3, if they click on one of those 3, then we could potentially automatically add it to training phrases for that from the very beginning. The very first entry that they put in there, we can put that to the training phrases and self-train. Now, I would recommend an additional step that says, did this give you what you need?
Yeah, sure.
Only do the add if they interact with it. And you're not going to get 100% compliance with yes or no on that.
But at least it closes the loop, I guess, on that.
Right.
But so then do you need to go back into your, so like you said, you're going to have to, I guess, analyze these responses, and then do you have to manually go back into Dialogflow and do anything, or is there a way to use AutoML to then make Dialogflow better, all this stuff that you're writing?
In that loop that I just referenced, if you automatically say, if you set up something that says, they click yes, that answered my question, and you took that training phrase and via the API, put it on the intent, I'll go into something in here in the configuration. There is a automatic retraining.
Gotcha.
So you have to disable it by default. So in order to not automatically retrain based on changes to intents, you have to disable it.
Gotcha.
But even if it were turned off, for example, or you had reached a limit, you could manually kick off training anytime you add training phrases to an intent.
Cool. That's neat.
A question, how long does it take to train the model if it's a kind of a simple conversation or a really complex model that you're training?
So generally speaking, it doesn't take much more than I'm sorry, Brian, I'm going to answer the question a little bit obtusely first. Dialogflow has a limit to 2,000 intents. Dialogflow ES in particular, that version, 2,000 intents. So as your language model grows up toward that, it's going to take a little bit longer, but we're talking minutes at max, and more often you're talking seconds.
Okay. And what sort of compute power is behind this training? Is it at your local computer? Is it being done in the cloud? Do you know what sort of compute power is behind there? Do you know if they're using like CPUs or GPUs, or don't you know?
I do not have any visibility into that. I can tell you that when you look at other when you look at Rasa in particular, if you have an NVIDIA GPU, it will use the NVIDIA GPU to train that. So I would assume that Google, Amazon, and Microsoft too are using
GPUs probably gonna have to train.
GPUs.
Okay.
I can tell you that Rasa in particular uses TensorFlow to build its language models. So maybe someday AMD will actually release an ML library that allows us to really leverage the out of the box GPUs, but NVIDIA really already has something available. So if you got an NVIDIA, you can use it on Rasa. I assume that everyone else is doing the same thing.
Hi, Brian. This is Danica Hannon. I noticed on your LinkedIn profile that you're paying a lot of attention to emerging technologies. Is quantum natural language processing something that's on your radar?
I've not been looking at the
Oh,
quantum.
I'm so sorry. I addressed that wrong. Daniel, that question was for you.
Okay.
No, I am intrigued by that, but by the combination of words. Tell me more.
Yeah, so quantum natural language processing is a really emerging area where it's natural language processing that's more meaning and context aware than the methods that we currently have. So it's very much in its infancy, but there's a lot of exciting work that's starting to come out around that. And given your interest in natural language processing and emerging tech, I thought I'd run that question by you.
So the description that you provided, I would not have put that in the area of quantum natural language processing, but I will say that of particular interest to me is Rasa, because they're trying to take intents out of it and make it contextually aware based on the word usage, not based on handcrafting intents and conversations.
That's great feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's coming along the same lines. I mean, right now there's a lot of handcrafting going on here with regards to dialogue flow. It feels like it's pretty supervised learning, I guess, right? So how far do you even think it's possible for us to get to a point where you don't need to do any of this? It's actually just completely conversationally built. And obviously there might be certain domains, but you know, it's kind of, you don't really need to do this stuff anymore. Do you think that's even possible?
I think that we've already seen some of that happening. GPT-2 in particular, I have not yet played with GPT-3, but GPT-2 in particular can do some of that.
Mm-hmm.
Bert and Roberta can do a little bit of that. You can build bespoke solutions that use things like Bert or GPT to extract information from whatever data sources you have or document sources you have to do that generation. So you have a couple of models. You have you build models using transformers, BERT or GPT, and then you also build separate models for the generation piece. Combining those together, we've seen the combination of those two in practice. In fact, Walden University just released a reading comprehension tutor that is doing some of that. It is generating questions that users can respond to for an authentic assessment, if you will, or even multiple choice assessments, where users can read a given piece and then they're quizzed on that using short form answer, multiple choice, true, false, so on and so forth. And I think you can find that on Google Cloud's blog under the education side.
Awesome. Yeah, Jeff has posted some other links too in our chat if people are following along with regards to, I guess, Google's Mina allows you to do some pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, Mina was pretty far away from a production release, but oh, it got me so excited.
Well, I was going to say I interviewed a guy that was one of the founders of a system called AI Dungeon, and if you haven't checked it out, just Google AI Dungeon, and you can go on there and you can. It's like playing D&D, right? And every adventure is different, right? Because you start asking questions of it, and it's using GPT-3 actually. These guys had early access to it, and they built some pretty cool stuff. Now, you know, there's definitely some warts. There's some things that it can take you off down some random paths, I guess. So it's definitely not perfect, but it is a pretty cool way to be able just to sort of chat back and forth. And it's kind of impressive, I guess, how big the model is. I mean, I guess it has, billions and billions of features, and it took them, years to program this thing, I guess, or quite some time, I guess, to basically be able to get this model trained. But it's pretty neat.
Massive compute is required. I would love to see Mina provide the power for these tools, but we talked about it in heavily regulated environments. I think that, again, we're some years away from let's say lawyers accepting the use of generative answers. The GPT-3 nonsense that you can get out there makes people a little bit gun shy.
Yep, totally true.
Can you comment on kind of simple intent versus complex intent? Is it able to discern kind of more complex intent? Like, for example, instead of just saying, what's the weather forecast, or what's the chance of rain in Denver on Thursday or something, and being able to discern more complex intent.
So there is the capability, and I'm going to go into the form that was defined. So in your example, you're given a date, or a date and time, and you're asking a binary question, or you're asking for a qualitative question. What is the chance of rain, or is there a chance of rain? You can create your training phrases in such a way, and your parameters in such a way, so that your bot understands the individual pieces. And that really comes down to the parameters and entities. And I'm going to draw an analogy with the form here. So let's say first name is the location, product is the date and time, or product is the rain or snow or precipitation. Okay. And email is the type flag of information you want to know. I'm looking for a binary indicator. I'm looking for chance of, not is it going to rain, yes or no? Hopefully that answers your question.
So you can build up kind of more complex intent instead of just simple intent.
That's correct. That's correct. And you can make so I would encourage you to think about it in terms of conversation. So if you're going to ask somebody what the weather is, do you know what the chance of rain is on Thursday? Like, how do you do it? How do you go about the conversation? If you're on the receiving end of that, how do you disambiguate? How do you converse? In that case, you extract what meaning you can. In the way that I said it, I didn't give a location. Well, when you're in conversation, do you assume that they mean Minneapolis because you're in Minneapolis? But I'm in Lakeville, so that wouldn't be right. Do you assume St. Paul because Justin's in St. Paul? No, you ask, are you asking for the general Twin Cities, or is there, where are you?
Yeah, I've actually found it's been kind of interesting to play with these more on the side of Alexa, but again, it flows into conversation and like discussion, where I'll say, what was the score of the Twins game, right? And it knows I'm talking about the Minnesota Twins, and it knows that it's the score of just the game that just happened last night. It's pretty cool how it's able to pick that up. It's not always perfect, and sometimes as a user, you find yourself speaking, it doesn't understand you, so then you got to step back and say, what if I phrase it this way? And it's probably, to your point, you want to try and make it feel a little more conversational, like as a human, how would you say it? But sometimes if you speak to some of these things, you actually have to, I feel like, sometimes you have to change your phrasing.
And you're going to make assumptions. So we make assumptions in our conversation. When you make those assumptions, make it known that you're making those assumptions. So if you were to ask me what the weather is today, or what the chance of precipitation is for Thursday of next week, then I'm going to say, actually your Google Assistant, your Alexas, your Siris are going to say, in Lakeville on Thursday, it's going to be blah, blah, blah. And then you can say, well, what about Minneapolis? And due to context, it knows, these systems know that you're talking about the weather still and the date and so on.
It may just jump into the context dependency, because what we're starting to discuss is context. And it's very related to deep learning. And in deep learning, we have very simple limits, hundreds of layers. But when we talk about the human conversation, it's thousands of millions of context variables which involved during in a conversation. I can look at your bag in your wall, and I can see the multiple contexts which will, trigger the Beatles idea, everything. So this is far from any even close possibility of artificial intelligence come to recognize more than hundreds context layers, which can provide the simple answer, what is the weather? It might be small talk. It might be just a simple chat. Or maybe I'm a farmer. So that it's not only about location, it's about the reason I'm asking about the weather.
Right.
How to recognize the reason. There is no way currently you can add these layers and knowledge and parameters dynamically to the model. So that's why I mentioned that chat to chat or bot to bot and human to human, it must be at least for the next decade. Because currently we are so tight with chatbots. They're stupid, they're dumb, and if you read the CRM magazines and everything, so the number of articles criticizing the current chatbots, it's tremendously big. So we're not, when we're creating another demon, evil, which come and start to help me almost in nothing, because the information reason I am talk to the database, show me if you have this car or not car, or it could be, I want a milk. It's something very simple. But it's not about conversation, it's about connection to the database.
So I agree with you and disagree with you. I think by and large, chatbot implementation out there has been shoddy at best. We have attempted to make FAQ bots and sell them as conversational agents. And when we take that step further, as you just mentioned, and connect them to a database, we assume that individual transactions are some kind of conversation, and they're not. Without building a state machine in there that can handle the context.
But even before the state machine, sorry, I interrupt you, but before the state machine, we must come to the point about what kind of information I am as a user needed.
Right.
So, and if you can't predict my information, which is measurable in bits, bytes, etc. So the optimization of my interaction, my conversation with chatbot must be satisfy my demand in information quickly and fast as soon as possible. So if you compare now human and chatbot, the cost of the chatbot and amount of time I will spend with chatbot is tremendously different with live person.
It is, and it is, yes, it absolutely is. And there are a number of reasons for that, or a number of ways to address that. First, being if you're narrowing the scope of what you do when you're developing a chatbot at first, and make that known to your end users, then they will converse with the chatbot based on those topics. The second thing is get out of the way. If you're developing a chatbot, get the hell out of the way of the user and the connection to a human being. Because if they want that connection to the human being, and you have a warm body to connect them to, you should absolutely do that, because computers are dumb, emotionless machines. Humans are warmer and, let's hope, more empathetic to the plight of the user. Now, with that being said, our experience has been that our users love the lack of judgment. we have an adult population of students that are often first time in college. They're the first person in their family line that has gone to college. And the judgment associated with not knowing what to expect, it's harsh for them. They like talking to a machine and getting answers like that. Okay.
Good. Well, time for one more question here. If anyone has one, we're beyond our 8 o'clock sort of soft ending, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's been really, really great. Appreciate it, Daniel. Anyone else have another question they would like to ask?
I want to bring up the idea of analyzing the sentiment of people's responses. I just finished one of the courses I found on Udemy about bots that I took was sentiment analysis for chatbots, where if the sentiment starts to go against you, like if they're starting to get angry before they've gotten really angry, notice that trend and send them to a human as a thing that not that many people do, but that course actually provided sample code, so it makes it pretty easy. They provided a chatbot, kind of a UI that goes between the end user and dialogue flow. So you can catch them, of course, when they're already angry, but you can catch them a little bit earlier when they're on the way to getting angry, and then maybe still save the day.
Jeff,
yeah.
In that example, were they building a domain-specific sentiment model, or were they using sentiment analysis provided out of the box?
They went over 3 different ones. They went over one. The first one was the one called Vader, and it basically just has codes for the different words about if they're positive or negative numbers, and it gets you a feeling about if that utterance that they typed in, if that was, you know, positive or negative. And then you just watch, they would record at each step the score, so then they could have a sense of over the last 3 or however many, has that score been declining or increasing, right? And then the next one they showed how to connect it up to IBM's natural language processing API to, you know, from the Watson thing to get sentiment scores from over there. And then they showed how to use Google's NLP from, you know, that API as well to get the same kind of a sentiment thing. The one from IBM seemed a little more sophisticated than what the others had as far as like what kind of scores you could get, but it was easiest for them to work with the Google one. So that was what they ended up showing as the in the example code.
The reason I asked,
yeah, sure.
For all of everyone listening, the reason I ask is that when you use, all of those are out of the box from a variety of systems. But
yeah,
if you were to ask about probation and parole management programs, probation and parole are very negative words with very negative. So your sentiment is going to be, because it's a broad language model, those are going to have negative sentiment scores. Let me give you another one. And Jeff, with being within higher education, you might be able to relate to this as well. A refund in higher education for financial aid purposes is a positive thing. But a refund in the general world is a negative thing. So going with an out-of-the-box sentiment, you really need to fine-tune a sentiment model.
So they didn't get to that level of detail. They got, as the farthest they went was having us download the different you know, lists of words and the weightings so that we would be able to change them if we wanted. So they had the AFIN and Vader and Google's NLU, IBM's Watson one. On Google's one and Watson, you know, we don't get the chance to change them because they're out of the box. The ones that you download, well, then you're free to do whatever you want. So the AFIN one and Vader, those two models. Actually, more like word lists, not so much a model.
Yeah. That's an interesting point, Daniel. Like you said on the just the meanings of it. So yeah, these things need to be sort of tuned, so they're actually dealing with the right thing. I had to kind of chuckle because, you know, every time I call in for support and get myself in basically just a voice response loop, I'm just the person that just presses 0000000, right? And pretty soon the system says, okay, we'll connect with a human. And that's my way of showing that I'm frustrated, right? And so I don't, it's interesting that, you know, we can kind of do that on the phone. We can sort of like hit the eject button and abort out of these things. And I guess, Jeff, you're saying there's probably a more linguistic way to do that as well. If you just start using 4-letter words in your chat bot, and then you'll eventually end up hitting a human, I guess.
You're doing it right. If they aren't, they're just gonna keep asking you, I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
Right.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question. Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, you know, and on your responses to that, the default ones are not so great. You might want to customize your responses to those in that case. So then you're not sending people into the loop of, you know, like that's like hell, right? Being stuck with the same thing. It doesn't understand you. And then it lost its context because you've asked it a couple times and then it got confused a couple times. So it's probably already reset the context. So it doesn't know where where you were in the flow, but you think that it knows who you are still and what you were talking about, and it's completely lost. And you know.
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool.
Sorry, I want to, one last interjection.
Yeah.
I also put in the chat there the link to that course that on sentiment analysis. It's a quick one, but wait for a sale. It gets a lot cheaper when Udemy has a sale. I think it was down to like $12 or something the day I clicked on it, where it's sometimes normally up to like 100 or something.
Nice, thank you.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jeff. Well, great. Like I say, we covered a lot of ground here tonight, Daniel. I appreciate everything that you've shared. It's been great conversation with everyone here, and you know, I'll put this out on YouTube. I'll post the links. I also posted a link to our, if people didn't see, a link to our Slack channel that we have on the AppliedAI group. So hoping to continue the conversation there as well. You know, learn about any sort of new courses. You know, Jeff, please post stuff. Daniel, please post stuff, both on the meetup and we'll just sort of keep in touch, I guess. Make sure you come back next month. We'll be talking about PyTorch and be going through some computer vision stuff around that. But again, Daniel, appreciate everything that you've shared with us today, and look forward to you know, continuing to see all the cool stuff that you and your business are going to be continuing to build here over time.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.